Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Robert Adams. This evening we warmly welcome the family of Private Walter Pinkerton, whose story will be told shortly by Captain Tyrone Riley from the Australian Army, who is the great-great-nephew of Private Walter Pinkerton. We warmly welcome the Department of Defence delegation who are in attendance this evening. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family, visitors to the memorial, and students on behalf of St Joan of Arc School from Brighton, Victoria. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Walter Pinkerton. Walter Pinkerton was born in May 1885 in Brisbane, the youngest of 4 surviving children of James and Mary Pinkerton. The Pinkerton family moved to Melbourne at some point in Walter's childhood. Living in Port Melbourne after he left school, Walter became the caretaker of the Port Melbourne cricket ground and the nearby bowling green. He married Lillian Agnes Edwards in 1914. When war broke out in 1914, Walter's brother, William Pinkerton, joined the Australian Imperial Force and sailed with the first convoy of Anzacs in October. Months after the event, Walter received the terrible news that his brother had been killed in the landings on Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915. In January 1916, following in his brother's footsteps, Pinkerton volunteered for service in the AIF. He completed his initial training at Broadmeadows Army Camp and in April embarked from Melbourne on the transport ship Euripides, and he continued his training in England at the Army Camp on Salisbury Plains. In September 1916, Pinkerton sailed to France, and in November he joined his unit, the 23rd Australian Infantry Battalion. Soon after he joined the unit, it spent time in the frontline trenches north of the Somme River. The French winter of 1916 and 1917 was one of the coldest in living memory, and the wet and cold conditions in the trenches led to disease. Early in the year, Pinkerton was evacuated to hospital with trench foot, an affliction caused by prolonged exposure to wet and cold conditions. He also had infections in both ears. He was evacuated to hospital in England for treatment. By March 1917, he had recovered and returned to training to regain his strength. In September, he sailed again for France and rejoined his unit at the end of the month. When he returned to his unit, British commanders turned their attention northwards towards Belgium. They had launched an offensive aimed at pushing the German forces out of Flanders, with the objective of capturing the relatively high ground of Passchendaele Ridge. The campaign is known as the Third Battle of Ypres. The 23rd Battalion was now in Belgium, preparing to participate in the offensive. In the week after he returned to the 23rd Battalion, Pinkerton spent time in reserve behind the first Australian attacks around Ypres. He and his comrades also inspected large-scale terrain models of the areas they would soon be attacking. At the beginning of October, the 23rd Battalion advanced to the front lines. German artillery shelling of the British lines was constant, and during this advance, 28 men of the unit were killed or wounded. During the first week of October, the battalion acted in support of other Australian attacks towards Passchendaele Ridge. The men dug communications trenches and strong points and carried ammunition to the attacking units. On the 9th of October 1917, the 23rd Battalion participated in the attack on Polkapel. Forming up in the frontline trench early in the morning, the men began their advance just before 5:30 a.m. They came under heavy rifle and machine gun fire as they advanced, and at some point during the day, Pinkerton was killed in action. He was 32 years old. The battalion had attained its objectives and held the captured ground so Pinkerton's body could be recovered. He is buried in Hagel Dump Cemetery near Ypres alongside more than 400 Commonwealth soldiers from the First World War. In Australia, Pinkerton was survived by his widow Lillian, his older sister Polly, his nieces Daisy, Edith and Thelma, and his nephews William and George. Private Walter Pinkerton is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. A photograph of his headstone is displayed by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Walter Pinkerton, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
If you're able, please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support of the Memorials Development Project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.